Happy day, everyone. John Peterson here from J. Peterson Photography. Today I want to talk a little bit about balance and what that means in photography and in your work of compositions. Let's go ahead and take a look at the definition of the word balance. One definition can be a condition in which different elements are equal or in the correct proportions. Another definition is also listed as an even distribution of weight. Well, that's great from a generic perspective, but how does this apply in photography? Let's look at definitions of balance in photography. Surprise! I'll use the same definition. It's really a condition in which different elements are equal or in the correct proportions. So when you look at a composition, there's different elements in that composition, and what are the proportions and what is the relationship between one element to another? So the size of the relative elements can have an effect on the balance in a composition. It also affects the relationship between one element and another, which does in turn affect balance. Likewise, positive and negative space can also affect the balance in photography. Too much negative space, too much positive space. So by too much positive space, it would mean that really the composition is way too busy and I can't pick out or discern specific elements in an image. So the right balance of both positive and negative space within an image can affect its balance. An even distribution of weight. So back to the previous slide where we were talking about generic definitions of balance, it also applies in photography. You may be asking me or asking yourself, how can a photograph have weight? Well, it's a visual weight. And by visual weight, I mean visual importance, how heavy a photograph feels. All of those things can go in to give you this perception of visual weight. So likewise, the size of these relative elements can add to or subtract from the weight of an image. Lights and darks in an image can affect the relative weight in a composition. If you have an image that's predominantly dark, what are some common words that are used to describe that? Well, heavy. Heavy is the first one comes to mind. So a heavy image, it may be the story you're trying to tell or it may not, but lights and darks can have really a dramatic effect on the weight of an image, which then affects the balance of an image. And then again, positive and negative space also can affect weights within the image. So let's talk about a balanced composition for just a second. So my definition of a balanced composition is that it involves balancing the elements in an image so that no one element overpowers the other or distracts the viewer's attention. So again, going back to that relationship, the size, the light or the dark, there's nothing within the image that is completely distracting in it. Everything feels about right. The different elements in this image can work together and fit as a seamless whole. Okay, so you want all the elements and all the lights and darks and the weights and everything to be very complementary to one another, because when you have a balanced composition, it feels stable and it's aesthetically pleasing. Some of the elements may be a focal point and attract your eye, but none should prevent you from seeing the rest of the image. And what we're really driving for in balanced compositions is all of these different elements working together to create a sum that's bigger than any one piece. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about just a little bit about unbalanced compositions. So what are those? So one element is overpowering the others, or the weight of the image is skewed to a particular point in the composition. So let's say you have a massive dark area in the lower left-hand corner of your composition. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know, but really what you've done is you've created this massive dark spot, and that may attract the viewer's eyes so to the point where they won't get into the rest of the image. Also in unbalanced compositions, It might not be as good as it overall could be because it's not a sum of all of its parts. It's a collection of individual elements instead of a sum of all of its parts. And then lastly, unbalanced compositions can bring tension to the image and sometimes an unsettled feeling to the viewer. Generally, a lot of people, they can look at something and go, or yeah, it just feels right, or it doesn't feel right. And that's really oftentimes the presence of tension in an image. So, what is right? Well, there really never is a right answer. It all depends on what you're trying to do. An unbalanced image may be right for the story you're trying to communicate to your audience. If so, do it. The advice that I would give you in this point is do it and be really overt about it. Make the audience know that you are purposely trying to create an unbalanced image. In general, though, most images are well balanced and very pleasing to the viewer. So let's go ahead and take a look at a few of my images in Lightroom, and I'll talk through whether I feel that they're balanced or unbalanced. Okay, now we're in Lightroom and we'll take a look at a few images. The first one up is this image that I shot on the east side of Mount Hood along the White River. This was shot last spring during a very low snow year. So unfortunately, all these rocks are bare, not covered in snow like they normally are. This to me is a great example to demonstrate and explain the concept of balance in an image. So let's take a look at some of the elements and how they work together within this image to create some balance. Starting on the left-hand side of the screen, the first big element that I see is this rock. The next thing that grabs my eye is this rock. Relatively the same weight. Then there's this other rock right behind it, and notice the angle of this rock. The angle of this rock sort of visually matches the angle of this rock, and the angle of this rock matches the angle of this and the angle of this. So you feel some balance and some symmetry on the left-hand side of the frame. On the right-hand side of the frame, it's about water and it's about patterns, basically. So in the lower right-hand corner, I have this big pool of white water. Then there's this other channel of water that comes in right here. Then there's a third channel of water that comes in right here. So all three of these are fairly similar. So I'm creating a repeating pattern that's going up the right side of the frame. When we look at left to right, I've got 3 elements here, and I've got 3 to maybe 5 elements here. Other things that help to balance this image is I've got this forest on the left and this forest on the right that are very complementary and balance each other out. I've got midtones, I've got lights, and then I've got a whole bunch of midtones, and I've got lights. So from a tonality or a lights and darks perspective, I've got good balance as well throughout this image. So to me, this was a great example to kind of help explain balance in an image. So let's take a look at another one. Here was one shot along the Oregon coast. Obviously, it's a big rock sitting in the sand. So is this image balanced? In my opinion, it is, because the only major visual element in this image is the rock, and the rock is right in the middle of the frame. You can't get much more balanced than that. Everything else, the sun, the clouds, the water, are not really strong visual elements. They help add context to give the viewer the impression or the knowledge to know where we're at, but they're not a strong visual element that may or may not affect the balance of the image. So I think this is a fairly decent balanced image. I don't think it's a great image, but I think it's very well balanced. Here's another shot from the coast. This is at Cape Kiwanda. This image is heavily balanced to the right. I've got the rocks, I've got the rock back here, I've got the rock back here, and the rock back here, all weighted to the right. I don't really have anything on the left to counterbalance this weight. When I shot this image, the cracks that were in the rock were kind of my main focal point, and I left some of the background information in to help give context. As I've looked at this image throughout the years, I still don't like this image, and it's because it is unbalanced. And, when I talked about earlier about intentionally making something unbalanced so the viewer sees, this image is not intentional enough to me. To me, it just seems like I'm in a bad spot. There's some cool cracks here. That's a great element. This is a great element. The sky's really pretty. Sorry about that. Sky's really pretty, but they don't work together as a whole to create a super strong image. So I think that this image doesn't work very well. Let's look at another shot from the coast. This one's shot down in Bandon, and this is a sunset. This is another really strong, balanced image, in my opinion. Most obviously, the rock on the left and the rock on the right create some very strong. They're two very strong visual elements that create balance. The tonality of those two elements are also very similar, so you get a very strong sense of harmony and balance left to right in the image. I've got three pointy C stacks sticking up, which, when we work in multiples of threes, people respond to that very well. I've got a really strong V right here in the middle of the frame, which also adds balance. V's, because each side is equidistant typically, perceptibly humans like V's, and this is one of those things that adds balance and adds some stability and an anchoring point for the viewer to feel calm and enter into this image. Looking at another one, this one was shot in the tulip fields down in Woodburn, Oregon, and this is the well shot, overshot windmill that's out in the Wooden Shoe Tulip Farm. This is obviously balanced to the left. The main point of this shot is really the silhouette of the windmill blades against the dark sky with the rising sun in the background. The mountain way off in the distance, Mount Hood, that's a bit player in this image. This is an intentional shot where I position the windmill on the left. If I would have shot that right down the middle of the scene or right down the middle of the composition, it would have looked horrible. So this is one that I was very intentional in putting it off to the left. So using this sort of unbalanced composition can be successful as well. Here's another image that I shot in Oneonta Gorge. This is in the Columbia River Gorge. This is a beautiful location, very steep walls, lush green vegetation all up and down the walls. It's just a magical place to be. As I was walking upstream, I came across this shot, and I contemplated this for a long time, and I eventually ended up shooting it, and when I got back home and looked at it, it's remained sort of in the trash can or remained in limbo. I don't think this shot works, large part from balance. When I originally shot this image, I was looking at this log as potentially being a leading line. Okay? Well, upon reflection, this log does nothing but become a barrier to the viewer. This log stops the viewer from going deeper into the image. And from a balance or an element perspective, like we talked about earlier, the viewer's eyes, there's a lot of weight right in here, and this is where a lot of the viewer's eyes get stuck and they never go farther deeper into the image. So from an element perspective, all the elements are not working together. From a balance of color or darks and lights, this wall on the left, brown, gray, a little bit of lichen, a little bit of moss, great. But on the opposite side of the image, I've got the other rock walls, but they're all covered in green. So I've got two different tonalities that don't really work well together. They're beautiful seeing them in person, but they don't work well together in this image. So from a balance perspective, it's not a good image, not well shot. I was caught up in the excitement of just being there because it's a gorgeous place, and I shot it, and it's going to hit the cutting room floor. So here's another image shot off of Whidbey Island up in Coopville. Is this a balanced image? Take a moment and just sort of reflect on this image. Is it balanced? For me, I would say it's highly balanced from an element perspective. I've got the piling on the left and the sailboat mast on the right that are extremely harmonious and very well balanced from left to right. Earlier, I talked about positive and negative spaces. I've got a lot of negative space in this image. All of this is sort of negative space, and really, because I de-accentuated the sky, all of this can almost be considered negative space. So I've got almost too much negative space, but in this case, the story that I'm trying to tell is about tranquility, solitude, quiet, those types of words to describe this image. And so, from a balance perspective, positive and negative space, I think it works for the story I'm trying to tell. From an elements perspective, I think it's balanced extremely well. From a tonality perspective, I've got this dark element and then this dark element as well. So, tonality wise, I think it's balanced as well. So, another shot from the Oregon coast is this particular one. This one, obviously, visually balanced to the left of the composition. And this was an intentional thing for me where I wanted to convey the feeling of being along a somewhat rocky coastline under a stormy sky at night. There's a very small rain shower off in the distance, right? Oops. Sorry again. Right out here. This was an intentional shot, and what I tried to do was cram the foreground rocks into this image with the fin of rock behind it. That's really the main part of this composition. I don't really intend the viewer to go beyond this, but if they want to, they sure can. Do I like this image? Not so much. Because it just doesn't feel intentional enough to me. Obviously unbalanced, but it's not intentional enough with my use of negative space on the right. And then lastly, let's look at this shot from last spring in the gorge. This is the Crown Point overlook from the Columbia River Gorge during sunrise. Take a moment and decide for yourself, is this image balanced or not? I've got a lot of black space. The first thing that catches my eye, of course, is all the black space in the lower right-hand corner of this image. Huge amount of black space, negative space. Do I have anything complementing that on the right from a weight perspective? No, I don't. Black space fills up most of the lower part of the image. I do have some balancing with this, so contrast, light versus dark, and I have a complementary dark space up here, which complements the dark space on the bottom. It's kind of like an Oreo cookie with a sunrise in the middle. That's kind of how I look at it. These mountains in the background kind of complement the lower right-hand side. I've got this line coming down here. Do I have anything similar? Well, it's kind of mimicked back here. It's a little bit of repeating patterns. I've got this line coming down here, which is kind of the same angle, same shape. Again, complementary design lines can lead to a balanced image. So overall, not a perfectly balanced image, but it's balanced enough that it doesn't bring tension and it works. So I hope you enjoyed this little video about balance in your compositions, and stay tuned to my channel to check out more videos. Thank you. Bye-bye.